Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be diving into a company called Oklo Inc.
Oklo.
And they have some really interesting ambitions in the nuclear energy space.
Yeah.
So our primary source for this deep dive is going to be their recent 10Q filing,
Okay.
which gives us a snapshot of their financials and their plans as of September 30th, 2024.
Right.
Now, here's where it gets interesting.
Yeah.
They're not just developing some new reactor technology.
Mm-hmm.
They're aiming to build, own, and operate these plants themselves and sell the power,
Exactly.
which is a very different approach from the traditional nuclear model and even most renewable energy approaches.
Yeah, it's a very different model. I
Yeah.
mean, think of it this way. They're not just selling the recipe. They're setting up shop and serving you the finished dish.
I like that analogy.
So they're betting on this build, own, operate model to give them more control over the entire process.
Okay.
From design and construction all the way to operation and even fuel recycling.
So they want to be involved in every step of the process.
Yeah, they want to have their hands in everything.
But before we get into like the nuts and bolts of how they plan to pull this off, let's talk about their goals.
Sure.
What are they actually trying to achieve? What are their ambitions?
Well, their stated goal is to provide clean energy at scale.
Okay.
And they're specifically targeting these big energy-hungry companies, Fortune global companies who are committed to reducing their emissions.
So they're not chasing a niche market here.
No, not at all. Global spending on clean energy technologies is expected to explode in the coming years, and that creates a huge opportunity for companies like Oklo.
So they're positioning themselves to ride that wave of clean energy investment.
Exactly. They're trying to get ahead of the curve.
But what exactly are they offering?
Okay.
You mentioned fuel recycling, which sounds intriguing.
Yeah.
But what about the power plants themselves? What makes them unique?
Well, their power plants are called Aurora powerhouses.
Aurora powerhouses.
And they're not your grandfather's nuclear reactors.
Okay.
These are next-generation fast fission plants.
Okay.
And they're designed with a few key things in mind: inherent safety, fuel, flexibility, and scalability.
Okay, so inherent safety and scalability. Those are certainly buzzwords in the energy sector these days.
Yeah, you hear them all the time.
But I'm guessing there's more to it than that.
Yeah, there is.
What makes fast fission technology so special?
Well, fast fission reactors actually have a track record,
Okay.
and a pretty successful one.
Oh, yeah.
Remember the Experimental Breeder Reactor 2, or EBR-2?
I don't think I do.
Well, it's successfully operated for over 30 years, feeding power to the grid.
Wow, 30 years.
And get this, it demonstrated the effectiveness of waste recycling.
Wait, hold on. They were actually recycling nuclear waste back then.
Back in the day.
I thought that was still kind of a futuristic concept.
Well, it's not just potential, it's a reality.
Wow.
And it's something Oklo is really banking on.
Okay.
Think about this for a second. The amount of energy that's just locked up in existing nuclear waste globally could power the entire U.S. for 100 years
100 years.
using fast fission.
That is mind-blowing.
We're talking about turning what most people see as a liability into an incredible asset.
Okay, that is a seriously mind-blowing statistic.
It is.
So instead of burying this waste, they could actually use it to generate more power.
Exactly.
That's closing the loop.
Closing the loop, yeah.
But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, how far along are they in actually developing this technology?
Mm-hmm.
Are they still in the lab, or are they closer to actually building these powerhouses?
No, they're definitely past the lab stage.
Okay.
They've hit several key milestones recently.
Like what?
Well, they've secured a site use permit for their first commercial plant
Okay.
at the Idaho National Laboratory, or INL for short.
Idaho National Laboratory.
And they've even been awarded fuel from INL to get this project off the ground.
So they have a place to build it?
Yeah.
And the fuel to run it.
Yeah, they're ready to go.
That's a pretty good start.
It is.
What else have they accomplished?
Well, they've successfully completed phase 2 of thermal hydraulic testing with Argonne National Laboratory,
Argonne National Laboratory.
which is critical for validating the safety and the performance of their reactor design.
Okay.
And maybe most importantly, they received the environmental compliance permit for their first commercial advanced fission power plant site at INL.
And that's a big deal.
This permit is huge. It clears a major regulatory hurdle on their path to bringing this technology to market.
So they're checking off the boxes on the regulatory front.
Yeah, they're making progress.
But what about actual construction? Have they broken ground yet?
Well, they've laid the groundwork, quite literally.
Okay.
They finalized a Memorandum of Agreement with the DOE Idaho Operations Office for site investigations at their location in Idaho.
Okay.
This is a critical step towards getting the site prepped and ready for construction.
So they're getting the site ready,
Yeah, they're moving forward.
and it doesn't stop there. They've also announced plans for additional powerhouses in Ohio,
Ohio.
and they've been tentatively selected to provide power and heat to Eielson Air Force Base. Wow. A project pipeline spanning multiple states and even military installations.
Yeah, they're thinking big.
That sounds like they're thinking big.
They are.
But all of this takes money and lots of it.
Yeah, you got to spend money to make money, right?
So what's the financial picture looking like for Oklo?
Well, their 10Q reveals a cash position of $288,470,604 as of September 30th.
Okay.
Now, that includes proceeds from their recent business combination,
Business combination.
which is essentially a merger that took them public.
Hold on, they went public recently. This company seems to be moving at warp speed,
They're moving fast.
but they're still in the development phase, right?
Yeah.
Are they profitable yet?
Well, like many companies in this high-growth phase, they're still operating at a loss,
Okay.
reporting a net loss of $63,327,233 for the 9 months leading up to September 30th.
So they're burning through cash, but they believe they have enough runway to get to the next stage.
Yeah, they're confident they have enough to keep the lights on for now.
But is there actually enough demand out there for this kind of power? Are companies actually lining up to buy what Oklo is selling?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
And the answer, at least so far, seems to be a resounding yes.
Okay.
They've secured non-binding letters of intent, or LOIs, for over 2,100 megawatts of power.
2,100 megawatts.
That's almost triple the amount they had when they announced their business combination in July of last year.
Triple the LOIs in just over a year. That's a pretty impressive jump.
It is.
But who are these companies that are interested? And more importantly, are these LOIs anything more than just expressions of interest?
Well, they've got some big names on the list.
Okay, like who?
Including Equinix, a major player in the data center world.
Okay.
Diamondback Energy from the oil and gas sector, and Prometheus Hyperscale, formerly known as Wyoming Hyperscale.
Wow.
They've also secured additional LOIs totaling 750 megawatts, specifically from data center customers.
So the demand seems to be coming from a pretty diverse range of industries.
Yeah, it's not just one sector that's interested.
Data centers make sense. They're notorious energy hogs,
They are.
and they need reliable power 24/7.
Exactly.
But are these LOIs actually leading to firm contracts? How do we know these companies are serious about buying Oklo's power?
Well, that's a good question. LOIs are essentially a signal of intent, but they're not legally binding contracts.
Yeah.
So there's always a chance that some of these potential deals could fall through.
So it's a good sign, but not a guarantee.
Right.
It's kind of like getting a bunch of RSVPs to your party, but you never know how many people will actually show up.
Haha, exactly. But the sheer volume of interest suggests that Oklo is onto something.
Yeah.
They're clearly tapping into this growing demand for clean, reliable, and scalable power solutions.
Okay.
And the fact that they're attracting interest from such a diverse range of industries is further evidence of the potential of their technology.
All right, we've covered a lot of ground already.
We have.
But I have one more question before we move on.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned fuel recycling earlier, and how Oklo's technology could potentially solve the nuclear waste problem.
Mm-hmm.
But is that really the whole story?
Yeah.
Are there any downsides or challenges associated with fuel recycling?
That's a great question, and one that definitely deserves a deeper dive.
Okay.
Fuel recycling has the potential to be a game changer for the nuclear industry,
Okay.
but it's not without its complexities.
So it's not as simple as just flipping a switch and turning waste into fuel.
No, it's not that simple.
I'm intrigued. Let's unpack those complexities in more detail.
Absolutely. But before we do that, what stands out to you so far about Oklo? What's caught your attention?
Honestly, the sheer scale of their ambition is what's really striking me.
Yeah.
They're not just tinkering around the edges of the nuclear industry.
Mm-hmm.
They're aiming to, rewrite the rules of the game.
Right.
It's like they looked at the traditional nuclear model and said, we can do this better, faster, cleaner, and on our own terms.
Yeah, it's a bold vision, that's for sure. And I think that's really where this build, own, operate model comes into play. It's about more than just selling power. It's about controlling the narrative and shaping the future of the industry.
But it's a risky bet, right?
It is.
I mean, they're essentially putting all their eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
What happens if this model doesn't pan out?
That's the big question, isn't it? The
Yeah.
nuclear industry has a history of being, well, let's just say it hasn't always been known for its agility or adaptability.
Yeah, to put it mildly.
Right.
And let's not forget the public perception of nuclear power, which can be a major hurdle to overcome,
Oh, absolutely.
especially after incidents like Fukushima.
Right.
There's a lot of fear and skepticism surrounding nuclear energy.
There is. But Oklo seems to be addressing those concerns head on.
Okay.
They're emphasizing the inherent safety of their design,
Okay.
the smaller, more modular scale of their plants, and the fuel flexibility, which reduces the need for enriched uranium.
Right.
They're trying to present a new face of nuclear power, one that's less intimidating and more aligned with modern sustainability goals.
And the fuel recycling aspect adds another layer of sustainability, right?
Absolutely.
It's not just about reducing emissions, it's about reducing waste and maximizing the use of existing resources.
Right.
It's almost like they're closing the loop on the entire nuclear fuel cycle.
Precisely. And that has some pretty intriguing implications, not just for the environment, but for the economics of nuclear power as well.
Okay, so let's talk money.
All right.
How does fuel recycling translate into dollars and cents for Oklo?
Well, for starters, it potentially reduces their reliance on external fuel suppliers,
Okay.
which gives them more control over costs and supply chains.
Right.
And in an industry where fuel is a major expense, that's a really big deal.
So they're not just selling power, they're potentially becoming a key player in the nuclear fuel market as well.
Potentially. Yeah. That seems like a pretty smart strategic move.
Yeah.
Especially if the demand for recycled fuel grows as more and more advanced nuclear companies come online.
Exactly. And that opens up new revenue streams.
It does.
I mean, they could potentially sell their recycling services to other nuclear operators,
Yeah, exactly.
further solidifying their position in the industry. It's a win-win. They reduce their own fuel costs and generate new revenue from a service that's likely to be in high demand as the nuclear renaissance gains momentum.
It's a pretty compelling business model if they can pull it off.
It sounds almost too good to be true. Are there any potential downsides or challenges associated with this fuel recycling strategy?
Well, there are always challenges when you're dealing with something as complex as nuclear fuel.
Right.
For one thing, the technology for recycling used fuel is still evolving.
Okay.
While Oklo's fast reactors are designed to use recycled fuel, the process of actually reprocessing the fuel can be pretty expensive and technically challenging.
So they're not just plugging old fuel rods into new reactors.
No.
There's a whole reprocessing stage involved.
Exactly. And that raises questions about the cost effectiveness of the whole process.
Okay.
Can they really recycle fuel at a price that makes economic sense?
Right. And what about the regulatory hurdles?
Uh,
Is it even legal to recycle nuclear fuel in the U.S.?
well,
I know there are a lot of concerns about proliferation and security when it comes to nuclear materials.
you've hit on a key point.
Mm.
The regulatory landscape for nuclear fuel recycling is complex and constantly evolving. There are very strict regulations in place to prevent the diversion of nuclear materials for weapons purposes.
Right.
And those regulations can add significant costs and delays to any project involving fuel recycling.
So even if the technology works and the economics make sense, they still have to navigate this maze of regulations and political sensitivities.
That's right. And let's not forget the potential for public pushback.
Oh, yeah.
Nuclear waste is already a sensitive topic.
It is.
And the idea of recycling it, even if it's done safely and securely, could raise concerns among communities that are already wary of nuclear power.
So fuel recycling is a potential game changer,
Yeah,
but it's not a slam dunk.
no.
Oklo is going to have to convince a lot of people that it's safe, secure, and cost-effective.
They have a lot of work to do.
They do. But let's shift gears for a moment and talk about another interesting development.
Okay.
Oklo's recent term sheet agreement with Atomic Alchemy.
Ah, yes, atomic alchemy.
Right. You mentioned they specialize in something other than just electricity generation, right?
That's right. Atomic alchemy focuses on isotope production, which is a whole other fascinating area within the nuclear realm.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm intrigued. Give us the isotope 101.
Yeah.
What are they and why should we care?
Well, think of isotopes as like siblings of the same element,
Good.
each with their own unique talents. They're essentially variations of an element with different numbers of neutrons,
Okay.
which gives them unique properties that make them incredibly useful in a wide range of applications.
Okay. That's a helpful analogy.
Yeah.
But can you give us some concrete examples of how these isotopes are actually used? What are their superpowers?
Sure. In medicine, isotopes are used for everything from imaging and diagnosing diseases to treating certain types of cancer. Imagine being able to pinpoint a tumor with incredible accuracy or deliver radiation therapy directly to cancerous cells while minimizing damage to healthy tissue. That's the power of medical isotopes.
Wow, that's amazing. So they're like tiny guided missiles that can target specific cells or organs.
That's a great way to put it. and their uses go far beyond medicine. In industry, isotopes are used for gauging the thickness of materials, testing the integrity of welds, tracing the flow of liquids and gases, and even sterilizing food and medical equipment.
It sounds like they're essential tools for a wide range of industries.
They are.
But what does this have to do with Oklo? Are they planning to become like a medical supplier or a welding inspector?
Not quite. But by acquiring Atomic Alchemy, they're signaling their intention to expand beyond just electricity generation
Okay.
and become a more comprehensive player in the nuclear industry.
So they're diversifying their portfolio and tapping into new markets.
Exactly.
That makes sense from a business perspective, but is there a deeper strategic rationale behind this move?
There is, remember, Oklo's core mission is to harness the power of nuclear technology for a wide range of beneficial purposes.
Right.
And isotope production fits perfectly within that mission. It allows them to leverage their expertise in nuclear engineering and reactor design to create products that has a direct impact on human health, industrial processes, and scientific research.
So it's not just about generating profits. It's about expanding the applications of nuclear technology to solve real-world problems.
Exactly. It's about changing the narrative around nuclear energy and demonstrating its potential to be a force for good in the world.
That's a powerful message.
I-
But before we get too carried away with the big picture, I want to circle back to Oklo's core business,
Okay.
building and operating those Aurora powerhouses.
Right.
We talked about some of the milestones they've achieved,
Yeah.
but what about the challenges?
Mhm.
What are some of the hurdles they'll need to overcome to make this vision a reality?
Well, for starters, they're operating in an industry that's notoriously risk-averse and slow to change. The nuclear industry has been dominated by these large, established players for decades, and those players have a lot of inertia.
So Oklo is kind of like the upstart trying to shake things up
Mhm.
in a very established and, let's be honest, somewhat bureaucratic industry.
Exactly. And that can be a really tough battle to win.
Yeah.
I mean, the traditional nuclear companies have deep pockets, strong political connections, and a lot of experience in navigating the regulatory landscape.
Right.
Oklo is going to have to be nimble, innovative, and persistent to carve out a space for themselves in this market.
So it's a David and Goliath situation.
In some ways, yes, but Oklo does have a few advantages.
Okay.
They're offering a technology that's fundamentally different from traditional nuclear reactors.
Right.
Their small modular reactors are inherently safer and more scalable.
Right.
And their fuel recycling capabilities address one of the biggest concerns surrounding nuclear power.
So they're not just competing on price, they're offering a fundamentally different approach to nuclear energy.
They are.
That can be a powerful differentiator.
It could, but they'll need to demonstrate that their technology is reliable, cost-effective, and perhaps most importantly, that they can actually build and operate these powerhouses on time and on budget.
Right, because the nuclear industry has a history of projects going over budget and behind schedule.
Oh, yeah.
And those kinds of delays and cost overruns can be killers for a young company trying to establish itself in a competitive market.
Absolutely. So execution is key.
Okay.
They've got a compelling vision and a promising technology, but they need to prove that they can deliver on their promises.
So execution is critical.
It is.
But what about the regulatory landscape?
Yeah.
We talked about the challenges of fuel recycling,
Right.
but are there any other regulatory hurdles they'll need to clear?
Well, the nuclear industry is one of the most heavily regulated industries in the world.
Yeah.
And for good reason, safety is paramount.
Right.
And regulators are understandably cautious when it comes to approving new reactor designs and operating licenses.
So even if Oklo has a great technology, they still need to convince the regulators that it's safe and that they can operate it responsibly.
They do. And that can be a really lengthy and complex process.
Okay.
Involving multiple agencies and layers of review.
So patience is key for Oklo and its investors.
Patience is key.
But what about public perception? We talked about the fear and skepticism surrounding nuclear power.
Right.
How is Oklo addressing those concerns? Are they doing anything to engage with communities and build trust?
That's a great question, and one that I don't have a complete answer to.
Okay.
From what I've seen, Oklo is focusing on transparency and education.
Okay.
They're actively communicating about their technology, highlighting its safety features and environmental benefits.
But is that enough?
Wow.
I mean, the nuclear industry has a history of being, well, let's just say, not always the best at communicating with the public.
Yeah, you're right. There's a legacy of secrecy and mistrust that the industry needs to overcome. And that's not something that can be done overnight.
So Oklo has its work cut out for it, both on the technical and the social front.
They do. It's a challenging journey, but one that could have a significant impact on the future of energy. If Oklo can successfully navigate these hurdles, they could really pave the way for a new era of clean, safe, and sustainable nuclear power.
And if they stumble?
Well, the stakes are high.
Yeah.
If they fail, it could reinforce the perception that nuclear power is too expensive, too risky, and too difficult to deploy. It could set the industry back years, even decades.
So Oklo's success or failure is about more than just one company.
Yeah.
It's about the future of an entire industry and its potential to contribute to a cleaner, more sustainable world.
Exactly. And that's why their story is so compelling. It's a story about innovation, ambition, and the challenges of disrupting an entrenched industry.
But it's also a story that's still being written.
It is.
We're in the early chapters, and there are many twists and turns ahead.
And that's what makes it so fascinating to watch. Oklo is pushing boundaries, challenging assumptions, and forcing us to rethink what's possible with nuclear energy.
It's a reminder that even in a seemingly mature industry like nuclear power, there's still room for disruption and innovation.
Absolutely. And that's a really hopeful message, especially at a time when we're facing these unprecedented challenges in the energy sector.
So what does this all mean for our listeners? What should they be taking away from this deep dive into Oklo?
Well, I think the main takeaway is that Oklo is a company worth watching, even if you're not directly invested in the energy sector.
Right, because their story has implications far beyond the world of nuclear reactors and power plants.
Exactly. Their journey touches on issues like climate change, innovation, economic development, and even national security. It's a microcosm of the larger challenges and opportunities we face as we transition to a more sustainable energy future.
But let's not forget that Oklo is still a young company with a lot to prove.
They are.
They're facing formidable challenges, and there's no guarantee of success.
That's right. But they're asking important questions, pushing boundaries, and forcing us to rethink the possibilities of nuclear energy. And that's something to be applauded regardless of the outcome.
Well said.
Mhm.
But before we wrap up, I want to circle back to one of the points you raised earlier.
Right.
The potential geopolitical implications of fuel recycling.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about the regulatory hurdles and the security concerns.
Right.
But what about the bigger picture? How could this technology impact global power dynamics and international relations?
That's a fascinating question and one that deserves a deeper dive.
Okay.
Fuel recycling has the potential to really shift the balance of power in the nuclear industry,
Okay.
and that could have ripple effects throughout the global geopolitical landscape.
So we're not just talking about energy, we're talking about power in the broader sense.
Right.
Political power, economic power, even military power.
Exactly. And that's what makes this technology so intriguing and potentially so disruptive.
I'm hooked. Let's dive into those geopolitical implications.
All right, so let's start with the basics.
Okay.
Right now, a handful of countries control most of the world's nuclear fuel supply. Enriched uranium, the fuel that's used in most reactors, is a highly specialized and tightly controlled commodity.
So it's a bit like the oil market, with a few big players calling the shots.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. And just like oil, access to nuclear fuel can be a source of both economic and political leverage.
So how does fuel recycling change that equation?
Well, if you can effectively recycle used fuel, you're essentially creating your own domestic fuel source.
Okay.
You're less reliant on those international suppliers,
Hmm.
which reduces your vulnerability to price fluctuations, supply disruptions, and even political pressure.
So it's about energy independence.
Yeah,
Countries could potentially break free from those dependencies and chart their own course in the nuclear realm.
exactly. And that could have a really profound impact on global power dynamics.
Okay.
Imagine a world where more countries have access to a secure and sustainable source of nuclear fuel.
It could level the playing field, at least in terms of energy.
It could.
But aren't there concerns about this technology making it easier for countries to develop nuclear weapons?
That's a valid concern and one that needs to be addressed head-on.
Okay.
The process of recycling used fuel does involve separating plutonium,
Right.
which is a key ingredient in nuclear weapons.
So there's a real risk of proliferation. This technology could potentially fall into the wrong hands.
There's always that risk, but it's important to remember that the technology and expertise required to build a nuclear weapon is far more complex than just having access to plutonium.
So it's not a simple equation. Just because a country can recycle fuel doesn't mean they can automatically build a bomb.
Exactly. There are multiple layers of safeguards in place, both domestically and internationally, to prevent the diversion of nuclear materials for weapons purposes.
But those safeguards aren't foolproof, are they?
Well, no safeguard is perfect.
There's always the risk that someone could find a way around them.
That's true. And that's why it's so crucial to have really robust international cooperation and monitoring to make sure that this technology is used responsibly.
So fuel recycling is a powerful tool,
Yeah,
but one that comes with great responsibility.
it does.
It has the potential to transform the energy landscape and reshape global power dynamics. But it also carries the risk of proliferation if it's not handled carefully.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers, but it's a conversation that we need to be having as this technology continues to develop.
Absolutely.
Mm.
We need to be thinking about the long-term implications, not just the short-term benefits. But let's bring this back to Oklo for a moment.
Okay.
How do these geopolitical considerations play into their strategy? Are they thinking about the global implications of their technology?
It's hard to say for sure, but I would imagine they're aware of the potential impact of their technology on the global stage.
Do you think they see themselves as playing a role in promoting nuclear nonproliferation? Or are they primarily focused on the commercial aspects of their business?
It's probably a bit of both. I mean, as a company operating in the nuclear space, they have a responsibility to consider the broader implications of their actions.
Okay.
But at the end of the day, they're also a business, and their primary goal is to be successful commercially.
So it's a delicate balancing act.
Mhm.
They need to navigate the ethical and political complexities of nuclear technology
Yeah.
while also trying to build a profitable and sustainable business.
Exactly. And that's what makes their story so fascinating. They're operating at this intersection of science, technology, business, and geopolitics.
It's a reminder that innovation doesn't happen in a vacuum.
It doesn't.
It's always shaped by the broader social, political, and economic forces at play.
And those forces can be unpredictable and difficult to navigate.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Oklo,
Okay.
what are your final thoughts?
Hmm.
What should our listeners be taking away from this conversation?
Well, I think the main takeaway is that Oklo is a company that's worth paying attention to.
Okay.
They're pushing boundaries, challenging assumptions, and potentially changing the game in the nuclear industry.
And their story is about more than just energy.
Right.
It's about innovation, risk-taking, and the challenges of building a new industry in a complex and ever-changing world.
It's also a reminder that technology is never neutral. It always has social, political, and economic implications, and it's up to us to shape those implications in a way that benefits humanity.
Well said. And I think Oklo's journey, regardless of the outcome, is a valuable case study for anyone interested in the future of energy technology and innovation.
It's a story that's still unfolding, and it's one that we'll be following closely.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Oklo Inc. We hope you found it informative, insightful, and perhaps even a little bit inspiring.
Yeah.
We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a company or trend that's shaping the future. Until then, stay curious.